I want to start out by talking about the present administration here. Because when you hear about the treatment of the press by the present administration, you always hear this sort of, well, you know, no president has ever liked the press. Well, yes, but no president has ever treated them like this president is. And I think this sort of gets me into what I wanted to say, which is that I came with a few facts about, you know, the press, suppression of the press and the media in general in Bangladesh, which I'll skip because I think that's been handled very well. But I did want to say that what is happening now is really, in a worldwide sense, almost worldwide, movements towards authoritarianism. Now, some of it's populist. I don't think that Sheikh Hasina qualifies as a populist, for example, but she certainly started the move towards authoritarianism almost 10 years ago. And authoritarianism, and I mentioned Sheikh Hasina, but I don't want to seem like it's a partisan thing, because in Bangladesh, I think authoritarianism has been a bipartisan thing. And I could give you chapter and verse of how both governments, or both parties, I should say, when they ran the government, have made things worse and worse, deteriorated the institutions that should have kept, pushed authoritarianism away, instead brought it closer. So, and this is, you know, I worry about this happening here too, because we see signs of it. But so far our institutions have held up. But it gets me to my more basic point about Bangladesh. I'm really going to end this, by the way, with what I think is hopefully good news. But, and that will be a way to end, I think. But let me go back and say the problem in Bangladesh, and I think most of the other countries that we're talking about, the problem is that politics, in the way we should think of politics, has failed. Now, let me just take Bangladesh, because I know that very well, although I also think that politics, which never really existed in Pakistan, has failed too. But politics are really, I think, when you go back into human history, way, way back, was a way that humans actually regulated their activities, that they found ways to keep violence down. If you think about it, political parties and politics were a way that they divided up what we call economic rents, the things that come from being a part of government. And what's happened in Bangladesh, at least, and I suspect a lot of other countries, is that politics is failing because it has become very, very much more a zero-sum game. What you get, I don't get. And this is where I think the whole world really is going in the wrong direction, and a very dangerous direction. Politics, as I said, let me look down at my notes, and I remember what I wrote to tell you it is. It's really the ability for societies to do collectively what they can't do individually, which is provide for the welfare and progress of the country. And that's why it's failing everywhere. Now, both parties in Bangladesh, as I said, are responsible for this. And that goes back, if you really want to know, to 2006, when the BNP was doing things. And then in 2011, after the Awami League had gotten elected by a great majority, they removed the only thing that kept politics stable and more or less, I wouldn't say healthy, but more or less functional, which was the so-called caretaker amendment, which guaranteed, when done right, that there would be a free and fair election. The periods between, say, 1990 and 2011 were basically stable because each party changed, had a chance at government every 5 years, and each party took the government every other 5 years because while the parties were in power, governance was not their objective. Economic rent was their objective, and so when they, and there was a large middle in the, and still is in the Bangladesh public and the Bangladesh polity, I would say, that swung from one party to another. So one party hadn't governed very well, the other one was elected, then that party didn't govern very well or at all, and that the next, the other party was elected, blah, blah, blah. You see where I'm going. Mm-hmm. When I last visited Bangladesh, I'm going to get into the human rights stuff and particularly suppression of the press. What I really noticed was a climate of fear. That is because by then, this was well after Sheikh Hasina had started eliminating her opposition and eliminating anybody who questioned what she was doing in the press or in the media. And it was hard to get people to even speak to you about this. And I think that, you know, it's only gotten worse since. And that climate of fear extended to the NGOs, and to the press, to the media, where a great deal of self-censorship was going on. And as you talked about very nicely, the social media, which started with that one and then has moved to an even steeper, worse thing. And, you know, you had even sort of repression in terms of Bangladesh history. If you don't view the liberation just the right way, you're subject to repression or jailing or, you know, and you could talk, nobody has mentioned here the ICT, which was the International Court Tribunal, Tribunal, which was to try the members of the leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami for treason during the Liberation War. And, you know, they used very, shall we say, unjudicial methods, basically were aimed at hanging all of them. And if you criticize that, you were also in trouble. As many people know, a friend of mine who's a British lawyer went out to defend a client, was not allowed after he was thrown out of the country. At least they threw him out; they didn't put him in jail. Now let me go. I'm really trying to hurry along, so this is really all history in a nutshell. I want to go to the good news, and then we can. Maybe we could talk about that as well as all the things that everybody has brought up here. I lived through, I witnessed the struggle for freedom and democracy in the late 80s and early 90s in Bangladesh. And I know most of the people who were involved in that. They were also, many of them, involved in the struggle for freedom from West Pakistan, or at least some respect from West Pakistan when they were part of Pakistan. And much to my surprise, these people have come out again in Bangladesh and are trying to depose the present government and trying to take the country back towards the center and towards a more democratic future. These people, I know them very well, they risked their lives in the 60s and early 70s. They've risked their lives in 1990, and most of them who are my age or even older are risking their lives again by leading the charge against the present government. They are veterans, but I know them so well that I know that what they really want is to just restore what they had fought so hard to set up in the first place, which was a Bangladesh that would move gradually but inevitably towards a democratic future in which you wouldn't see these kinds of repressions against the press and really against any opponent that turned up on the street, for example. So there is something that is run by, it started out as an alliance of small center parties, and it has grown because they have been able to hook up with the BNP. The BNP is so decimated that it really is about half the party it was. Couldn't have possibly won the election, the coming election on its own. In fact, part of the problem is that the BNP boycotted the 2014 election, which I think was the biggest mistake in Bangladesh history, if not in South Asian history, because they would have won maybe 100 seats, and they would have been able to at least put up some sort of block to what went on afterwards, because the minute that the Awami League government discovered that it had the government all to itself, the minute the Awami League discovered it had the government all to itself, let me put it that way, it went on a campaign to eliminate the opposition, the major opposition party. Very effective campaign. A number of my friends have spent time in jail. Most of them had to sign letters that they would never participate in politics before they could get out of jail. Those who didn't stayed in jail until they probably passed away. We don't know for sure sometimes. But not only friends of mine, but workers in the party down to the street level were disappeared. And I don't want to, I'm trying to keep this short, but what I'm saying is that, and I think this has global significance, because one of the things we aren't seeing in most countries is that the center is consolidating and fighting back against the authoritarians. And somehow Bangladesh has done it again. They're out front on this. Will they succeed? Well, it's going to be a very tough uphill fight. And I'm hoping those of you who have relatives or family in Bangladesh will convey to them the necessity for this to succeed and for them to get out and hopefully help, because it's going to be terribly difficult. One, there are a whole bunch of parties, something like 20 parties in this alliance. They all are ideologically a little different, from the left center to the right center. There are going to be the usual ideological differences that could break them up. There is also the problem of the division up of the seats that they'll run for. But the major problem, I think, the major problem will be when they have the 7 demands they've made for making a free and fair election are rejected by the government, which they basically have been. That's going to make some of the members of this alliance more interested in perhaps going off by their own, getting chummy with the government, or just giving up. And it's going to make others think about a violent reaction, which is just about as bad as the first kind. So what I'm trying to say is this is not anywhere near a sure thing, but it needs as much help as it can. Now, I will tell you about the U.S. government. This is the only thing I know about the U.S. government. They've become a lot more firm on this particular issue. I heard this yesterday from a couple of State Department people that they're being very, very tough. Doesn't mean we have any leverage. It doesn't mean we're ever going to have get anywhere. But I think at least we're going to try to make sure that this election is as fair as it could possibly be. So anyway, I've hurried through this. You haven't heard all of my great wisdom. I'll save that for the Q&A.